There is one thing that I'll do unprompted, potentially at any time, and often for free, with no incentive, and that is talk about the Flame Chasers. Their stories, the long, soaring arcs of their lives, are my absolute favorite story, maybe of all time, and waking up to the last Honkai Star Rail live stream was like waking up to bump into friends I hadn't seen in years. That being said, despite the Honkai in the name, a lot of HSR fans don't bother with Honkai Impact 3rd, and I understand the frustration that comes with not fully understanding what's going on or feeling like you have to play an entire other game just to get the full picture. There were a lot of reactions from fellow HI3 fans popping up on my YouTube feed after the drop, and, well, here in my little bubble universe, I have a lot of time on my hands, don't judge. I spent an afternoon skimming these videos, thinking about the difference in reaction between those who knew and those who didn't. I watched people ooh and ah and talk about their love of Greek myths, but then I watched people scream at the top of their lungs, beat their chests, weep, and gnash their teeth. I heard a heartfelt chorus of cries rise up all at once across a myriad of worlds.
The throne, alongside countless heroes, to embark on the grand mission of deliverance. Aglaea's tall king ascends the throne, alongside countless heroes, to embark on the grand mission of
Kevin! It's a world where heroes across the land
Finality!
on the flame chase journey together.
What the f***? A tree!
Go seek the priest
Leaf.
who severs dawn
Same
from
pose
dusk.
like an Elysian realm. Wait.
Fleet-footed. Command your
Pardo!
in time to once again heroes, to embark on the grand mission of deliverance. I gaze towards the distant future, where the sun shall etch the footprints of humanity. The children of humankind.
Me too, guys. This one's for you, UD. You're a real one. You're the only one who understands how I feel. I love Honkai Star Rail. Absolutely adore the characters and stories we've experienced along the way. My personal favorites are still the High Cloud Quintet, and now the Yaoqing Trio have won my heart. Look, I know it's been said before, but now this hits different. I know. The memes are endless. It's not Honkai Impact, it's Depression Impact. Everyone gets so emotional about Honkai Impact 3rd characters. Yeah, we do. Maybe it's because we've been with them for so many years. Maybe it's the specific style of writing and storytelling. Maybe it's the unbelievably cool animation and stellar acting. Maybe it's all of those, but in my role as the watcher of myriad universes, I think that these moments where two groups of people lack understanding can make way for beautiful connections to form. My friends on this other branch of the imaginary tree, so close that our paths share a name in the title, we should be reaching across space-time as brothers, not power scaling and having waifu wars. Today, we are brothers, or siblings, in arms, fighting the same war against the dark tide from beyond the sky that seeks to devour humanity. Let's be like our friend Welt Yang, with a foot in each world. Today, let me hold out a proverbial olive branch, and let's go follow the steps of the flame-chasing crusade, hand in hand, rather than as rivals or enemies. You and I are here for the same reason, because stories move us and show us the good, bad, and in between of what our own humanity is capable of, reflected in a riot of color and fantasy. So let's focus on that, rather than on our differences. You can call me Ganymede if you like. I'm the administrator of this space and a watcher of many different universes upon the imaginary tree. The great task before us is the flame-chasing crusade, and this here is Project Veluca. Here's my usual reminder not to assume that I think anything I'm about to extrapolate on is absolute fact. My talent and focus here is in finding connections and pointing them out. The Hoyoverse is vast, rich, and complex, And I do believe most references are intentional by the writers, even if it doesn't necessarily affect the story of the game it's confined to. What you decide to do, think, or believe about whatever story connections I point out is entirely up to you. Remember, the study of story writing and literature applies here. Metaphor is often more important than anything literal. Don't take it too seriously and draw your own conclusions. May the many parallels add more flavor for us all. On to the breakdown.
In the legend's beginning, the world was pure chaos. Then the gods cast down the core flames, and the titans were born within. 3 titans carved the heavens and earth. 3 wove the threads of fate. 3 molded life with their hands, and 3 guided Calamity's gate.
The front end of this trailer is loaded with exposition. The very first thing we see is the golden threads, said to be managed by Aglaea. We are introduced to a few important terms. We have gods, we have core flames, and the titans. Then we see a familiar layout that is immediately recognizable to people who have played the Elysian Realm story in Honkai Impact 3rd. A wheel with 12 signets surrounding a 13th symbol. We're then given an added distinction that is a secret tool that will help us later. 3 of the titans carved the heavens and the earth. 3 wove the threads of fate. 3 molded life with their hands, and 3 guided Calamity's gate. Much like with the 13 flame chasers, there is, of course, the secret 13th thing. Elysia's signet was kept a secret until a certain point in the story, and it seems that the 13th here is meant to remain a mystery as well. So, I sat with this and tried to break down which flame chasers belong to which category, and while I could arguably figure out the originals with some discrepancies, Mobius, Su, Griseo for the Molded Life section, Kalpas and Sakura in the Calamity section for sure, but I feel like any of those distinctions are really just worthless conjecture that do little to further our understanding of the new interpretation of the Flame Chasers in Amphoreus, so we'll leave it there. The important takeaway here is that there are 12 signets with a 13th secret signet. Here in HSR, those signets are called core flames instead. In Honkai Impact, members of the World Serpent Organization were sent into the Elysian Realm simulation in order to meet the 13, whose memories and personae were kept alive through a super advanced computer server where they had uploaded their minds at various points near the end of the previous era 50,000 years before the beginning of Honkai Impact 3rd. Each person would enter the Elysian Realm, the simulated world inside of the biocomputer, and it was literally a biocomputer, as in, it is implied that Aponia willingly died to be physically made into the main server of the Elysian Realm, and then face the challenges put before them by the 13, whatever those whims might be, and try to earn their approval and thus be gifted their signets. These signets would then impart some of the 13's power and or knowledge to the challenger. Actual effects of said signets and lore are unclear, though they basically serve the same purpose as the blessings in Simulated Universe in actual Elysian Realm gameplay, which can be considered the adjacent game mode in HI3. If nothing else, this is interesting to consider since we know that Amphoreus is a world that most people don't even know exists, and is, if not made up of Memoria, contained in some kind of bubble related to Memoria, as it can only be accessed using the Garden of Recollection's mirror. Black Swan says that this world is hidden away from outside observation, only revealed by the light from the mirror of the Garden of Recollection. This echoes what we've recently been told in Honkai Impact 3rd Part 2 about Earth itself, that the planet Earth from that universe exists in a bubble of Honkai energy almost completely inaccessible from the outside. You know, kind of like how they keep saying Teyvat from Genshin is mysteriously shrouded or cut off from the rest of the universe somehow, by someone or something we have yet to understand. I'm sure these facts won't come into play in huge and literally world-shattering ways or anything later on. I think it's pretty likely at this point that the concept of Fu Li, the Aeon of Remembrance, and how Memoria itself works as an in-universe mechanism is going to be very important for all 3 main flagship games at this point. A memo keeper, sharing March 7th's Chinese voice actor, has appeared in the main story of Honkai Impact 3rd at this point, speaking to Kiana, who's in a deep slumber on the moon. She seems to have appeared to bargain for some of Kiana's memories, and Kiana is not interested in sharing. At the same time, Sparkle is crossed over into this universe in main story canon, not as a side event or AU like the Genshin crossover, confirming that they are 100% happening in the same universe proper for any naysayers. There are a lot of implications about the Aeon Aha and their potential connections to the HI3 bubble itself, but I have another video in the works for that. We're already off track, so let's swing back to the Flame Chasers themselves. First of all, I'd like to point out, if you don't know, that the writer that the Penacony livestreams introduced to everyone, Mr. Shaoji, is in fact the same writer that wrote the Elysian Realm story and is on the writing team for Amphoreus as well, for obvious reasons, meaning they intend to keep a level of continuity. While we're still at the beginning of this breakdown, and before we get into the lore of Amphoreus itself that we have so far, I want to mention a few points that point to some overlapping themes here. Who can say for sure if it was always planned this way, but a lot of these things were brought into the story after HSR was well into development, or even after its release. Starting with, the Flame Chasers have always been kind of associated with Greco-Roman themes, myths, stories, and aesthetics. There's a pretty infamous CG art of Kevin and Su appearing in ancient Greece on Earth, a civilization that they specifically lived as part of and guided. The short version is that their civilization failed to stop the Honkai, and it was wiped out, save for a handful of survivors who went into a long 50,000-year sleep in cryopods in order to restart human civilization when the Honkai nuclear winter was over and the Earth was once again habitable. So they came into these newborn human civilizations with their highly advanced knowledge from 50,000 years prior, and were often viewed like immortals or gods wherever they ended up setting up shop. While Kevin and Su honeymooned on Greece, Fu Hua was leading the other part of Project Ember in ancient China, eventually founding the martial arts school of Taishuan. About this time, the titular spaceship of Project Ark, piloted by Griseo, the keeper of the Signet of Stars, set out on its second journey and lost contact with Earth. The Ark was basically an interstellar doomsday vault containing the human genome library as well as the DNA of countless species of plants and animals. The Ark was, simply put, a colonization vessel fully outfitted with the capability to seed life and terraform a planet to some extent, as long as it was somewhat suitable to Earth-like beings. During her planet-faring, Griseo seeded life on countless worlds and met and interacted with countless alien races, including discovering a planet of completely sentient Honkai beasts that were no different from normal humans. Her voyage came to an abrupt end, though, when the self-proclaimed goddess of the abyss saw, caught, and trapped her on a small planet on the edge of the galaxy, forcing her into an almost eternal sleep in her cryopod and using the Ark's life-seeding resources for her own plans. That planet was known as Chimeng, or Phosphorus, and was a civilization that was more or less identical to that same level of ancient Greece. With Su's help, Fu Hua eventually managed to rescue Griseo, who was able to wake from her slumber and join forces with the surviving Flame Chasers to take out Sa, the evil goddess who had waylaid her. Due to the distance between Earth and Chimeng, it would be impossible for Griseo to return home in a normal human lifetime, so despite being rescued from her fate, she's more or less stuck there. She's fine with this though and has taken on a kind of guardian role to the planet and its people. There are also countless textual references, especially surrounding Kevin himself with regard to historical heroes such as Achilles, Hector, and even Icarus. These stories get referenced often in regard to him especially. Anyway, all this is to say that the idea of the Flame Chasers existing in a Greco-Roman style setting is pretty much hard-coded into their lore and theming already. Amphoreus is kind of the natural evolution of that. Finally, circling back to the Amphoreus trailer. After the introduction of the core flames and their attributes, we move on to the history of the world itself. This is a pretty typical fantasy story foundation. Everything was good, the gods blessed the people thrived and made music and poetry and civilization. Then the bad thing came. It's described as a heretical black tide that came from beyond the world, which sounds pretty familiar to all of my Genshin followers, I'm sure. The concept of the Abyss, the Sea of Quanta, and the imaginary tree, Irminsul et al., exists in all three of the main Honkai-connected games. I consider Genshin part of this because it was originally developed as a Honkai title. Its working title was literally Honkai 2, and we already know that the two universes have interacted directly in main story with Auto Apocalypse seeing Dvalin through the data that the Flame Chaser Su gave him that was supposed to contain nearby important worlds on the imaginary tree. regardless of how connected Genshin is to HI3 or HSR. The world of Teyvat is undoubtedly of the same cosmogony. The all-devouring narwhal is a kind of interplanetary life form that exists in HSR. The Abyss and the Sea of Quanta have similar effects on people and places. I think that in this case we can assume that the heretical black tide here is in fact the same as the abyssal alien knowledge from outside the world, which is also more or less the same as the Honkai phenomenon back in HI3. It begets the same results. An alien force disrupts an otherwise orderly world, causing plagues, creating monsters, and corrupting the local life, making them turn on their fellow man. This is what happened in Amphoreus as well. Even the Titans, who were the bearers of the god's core flames, were corrupted and driven to madness, which is again pretty par for the course for this specific Hoyoverse phenomenon. The Honkai is finally Honkaiing, folks. Now, we don't know the nature of what kind of world Amphoreus is, but it seems to be similar in nature to Penacony, if only in the fact that it seems to be made up of Memoria. Again, we don't really know what that means for the status of the people who live there. Most of the denizens of Penacony are alive, despite the fact that they spend most of their time in a dream. It seems to be unique in that sense, though, and the idea that this world is only accessible via the Garden of Remembrance's mirror could be that it's just a memory and not a living world at all, but that remains to be seen. The keywords in the trailer description ask us not to forget Amphoreus' name. Another theory I thought of off the cuff is that this world has been tucked away in stasis, waiting for the events that need to transpire in order to save it from whatever doom has befallen it. Perhaps, rather than being made up of Memoria and this only existing as an echo of the past, the Garden of Recollection stepped in and encased Amphoreus in a barrier of Memoria in order to protect it for some reason. Much like the Earth and its galaxy in HI3 are sealed off by a barrier of Honkai radiation energy. We'll have to wait to find out for sure. The visual accompanying the part of the video that says the sun itself grew quiet in awe is pretty interesting, as the eye in the sun seems to be the same design as the Hersher of Corruption that was responsible for the end of the Elysian realm in HI3, so that's concerning. Definitely keeping our eye out on any kind of sun deity or sun god here. The Hersher of Corruption's traits focus mostly around self-preservation and propagation, which obviously are both buzzwords in HSR, so definitely worth keeping in mind. I doubt we'll get a direct retelling of the Elysian realm without the Hersher of Corruption or something adjacent showing up in some form or another. We do, after all, need an antagonist. The narration goes on to tell us that there was a millennium of conflict, leaving a shattered world and an age of darkness. This also, interestingly enough, kind of echoes the idea of the current era and previous era in Honkai Impact 3rd, though to what extent that will be the case, we won't know for a while, obviously. It could also be a reference to the fact that it was during the Flame Chasers' time that Earth's scientists discovered the fact that there had been previous civilizations before theirs, and that every 50,000 years, give or take, the Honkai managed to wipe them out again and again in an endless loop. This will likely also play into what's coming in Amphoreus. It is hinted that the flame chase in Amphoreus is something that has happened before, or has happened even multiple times just due to the wording later on in the trailer. The prophecy itself, flow, golden blood flow, flow unto the heroic heirs of this world, suggests that as well. I wonder if this world, much like Earth in Honkai Impact 3rd, has been locked in a long samsara as it battles against its version of the Honkai, the heretical black tide. And now we get to the meat and bones, and what I've been most looking forward to. Just like the original Flame Chaser trailers, we get our introductions to the heroes of the realm. This took me a lot of time and a lot of thought to sort out. I'm sure there are some members of the Chrysos heirs that are difficult to place, but as a Flame Chaser enjoyer, I'm pretty confident that I've gotten most of them figured out. There are the same number of male and female characters, and each Flame Chaser has several themes and ideas that they are associated with, and they're all mirrored in some way in the Chrysos heirs. Here, I'm going to break that down along with which Flame Chaser each one likely correlates with. Even the silhouetted ones are relatively obvious if you know the characters well. A few important things to note if you just don't know the first thing about Honkai Impact 3rd and the original Flame Chasers, as well as a few extra base connections already being made between the Chrysos heirs and the Flame Chasers themselves. The Amphoreus teaser mentions the Chrysos heirs having infused their bodies with Ichor, or Igor. This is true for the original Flame Chasers as well, and for them, it was a process known as the metamorph surgery, a pioneering technology developed by Doctors Mobius and May of Moth. The process had an astronomically low survival rate, with just 1% of applicants surviving the transformation. In HI3, being infused with Ichor entailed a surgery that implanted the genes of powerful Honkai beasts into human beings, imparting upon the recipients godlike powers that were strong enough to go up against the godlike enemies that the Honkai sent against Earth, the Hershers. As I introduce each flame chaser and why I think they correlate to the Chrysos heir I think they do, I'll list what their titles are, the nature of the type of Honkai beast whose genes they received if we know of them, and how that impacted their bodies and abilities. In HI3's main story, most of the flame chasers are already dead and gone, and they only get fully introduced into the main story when May Raiden, who is pretty obviously Acheron's alternate universe self, is sent to the Elysian realm, which is populated by the uploaded consciousness of the 13. Whether or not this fact has anything to do with the nature of Amphoreus being relegated to only accessible via the Garden of Recollection's mirror, well, that remains to be seen. Inside the Elysian realm, one of the ways May interacted with these memories was through vessels that rather morbidly, vaguely resemble urns for ashes. Each one of these contains memories belonging to a specific flame chaser and gives them an extra title. I'll be sure to share those as well. With that explained, let's get started with Aglaea herself.
Aglaea the Gold Weaver, you must gently caress the holy city's silken web and hearken to the sounds and voices of destiny.
I've seen a lot of people say Aponia upon seeing her due to her hair color, I guess, but I think it's pretty obvious that Aglaea is analogous to Eden. Aglaea's name means festive radiance and comes from one of the Greek charities or Roman graces. These three goddesses were often depicted as attendants to Aphrodite. Her drip marketing states that her core flame is the core flame of romance, and her teaser in the Amphoreus trailer calls her the Gold Weaver. Eden's signet is the signet of gold. Her Honkai beast form resembles a whale that is similar in appearance to the all-devouring narwhal from Genshin Impact. Along with Elysia, she designed and handmade the Flame Chaser's signature battlesuits. Aglaea being associated with this through her dress form puppets as well as the gold thread is pretty on the nose. Eden is the 4th ranked Flame Chaser with the aliases The Angel of Strings and The Voice of Heaven. The title of her main battlesuit is Golden Diva. Her codename and signet is Gold. She was a fashion designer, model, as well as renowned composer and musician in her time, who reached superstar status before the start of the apocalypse. In fact, Kevin and Su were huge fans of her during their high school years. She was the original executor of Project Ember to restart human civilization after theirs was wiped out, but she did not believe she could or should exist in a new era and chose to die along with their world, passing the role onto Fu Hua. Another interesting bit of trivia is the fact that she was the original user of the 9th Divine Key, now known as the Star of Eden, which is currently in the HSR universe, as it was passed down in Honkai Impact 3's current era and became the signature weapon of the Hersher of Reason. It is currently disguised as Weltgang's cane. Her remembrance vessel is called Singer's Memory. There's an excerpt in her remembrances that gives 2 acts of a famous play that she was in, likely an opera. The text itself is rather long and tells a story about a king who tried to cheat death by trading the lives of his subjects instead. One of the final lines and the main theme of the play is this: "When he meets death, surely he will protest, old friend. Why did you renege on our promise?" That is what he would say. "No, I did not," death would reply. "For you chose not to awaken from the pain of suffocation. You chose to die in peace in your nightcap. No matter what the realm, destiny will collect its due." This is a reference to how Eden chose to meet her own end on Doomsday, but may also point us again in the direction of her thematic connection to destiny and fate. Eden was also the main funder and founder of the Golden Courtyard, which was the Flame Chaser's secret base, and would eventually become the hub of the Elysian realm itself, further solidifying her role as the literal golden thread that held everything together. One main reason I think Aglaea is most likely the one meant to be a variant of Eden is the fact that Eden turned out to be perhaps the most important flame chaser with regard to memory and fate. Eden's strong memories of Elysia are the only reason that the Elysian Realm story was able to end the way it did. She was the thread quite literally holding the fate of that realm together, while Aponia was more like the loom that it was threaded upon. Aglaea is depicted in the Amphoreus trailer in front of a mural. Though a bit hard to pick out the details, it immediately reminded me of the Elysian Everlasting mural. That's a key plot point through the second half of the Elysian Realm quests and depicts Kalpas' arrival to Earth, among other things. This mural, if I'm looking at it right, seems to show something that is very similar in shape to the Ark, towering above a landscape which is a familiar sight to anyone who played the Chimung and Phosphorus story arc in HI3. It's also like 5% vibes. Her face, especially, is very close to Eden's expression in my opinion, and this holds true for a lot of the others, as I'll point out.
There shall be the three-faced messenger traversing through myriad doors, bearing tidings to you from hundreds of worlds.
Trippy is a difficult one, as she's the only one who doesn't really share any major visual similarities with a flame chaser. She is called the three-faced messenger, which is interesting within HSR lore itself, as we have two three-faced deities already. The Harmony, Sheepe, and Gaiathra Triclops from Aventurine's homeworld, Sigonia. Trippy's design itself doesn't give many clues. If anything, one might say she looks most similar to Griseo when she was young, and you could make the argument that Griseo too became a person who would travel between worlds as the pilot of the Ark. It's definitely one of the possibilities. But with our current knowledge and only having silhouettes of the last few to go off of, I genuinely think Trippy may be Vill-V. Vill-V is the 5th ranked flame chaser and bearer of the signet and codename Helix. Her aliases are many, including the Great Magician Vill-V, the Expert Vill-V, the Scholar Vill-V, Model V, Kevin Killer Mark V. Her battlesuit is called Helical Contraption. The true form of her Honkai Beast form is unknown, but due to some things in her remembrances and her designs, many fans think it may have been spider-like in shape. Vill-V is depicted in the ending of the Because of You animation specifically with 3 faces through mirrors, though she has upwards of 8 split personalities. This isn't a case of classic dissociative identity disorder exactly. It's a side effect of her mantis surgery. The Honkai Beast she was fused with gave her the ability to willingly split her mind into different personas, but the more she splits, the more difficult the resulting offshoots are to control or maintain. She uses this ability to delegate tasks and basically use her mind at a level that is just incomprehensible to most other people. Further strengthening the three-faced connection, she separates her split personalities into 3 groups: the Conductor, the Great Magician, and the Expert. No matter how many singular slivers of herself are active at any time, they can all be boiled down to and contained within these 3 groups. Vill-V is the creator of the Divine Keys, 2 of which are currently in the HSR universe: Welt Yang's Star of Eden, as mentioned before, and Void Archives, who gained sentience after the fall of the Flame Chasers era and crossed over into the HSR universe with Welt as his companion. He's the previous owner of the drinksmith of the party car, Shush. Vill-V's remembrance vessel is called the Fool's Memory. Vill-V is an inventor and can certainly be associated with the idea of travel, as she was responsible for creating the Ark itself, which can, obviously, travel between worlds literally, as well as Cosmic Juggernaut, the divine key that is rumored to be the basis for the Astral Express. This is even mentioned directly in Eden's remembrances. If I remember correctly, this should be the first divine key to have absolutely nothing to do with the moths, right? Uh-huh, that's right. There's no rule that divine keys have to be a sword or a gun, you know? I have a hunch. The second divine key you've made will be recreated one day by just the right person and for something we can't even imagine yet. In the Amphoreus trailer, we see Trippy interacting with her multiple selves, which is also commonplace for Vill-V, as her split minds would constantly bicker and sometimes even sabotage each other. I think that if you strip away her steampunk inventorness, which doesn't really fit in an ancient Greek setting anyway, you really would get something rather close to this character, but this is again one of the ones I'm least certain about, so we'll see how it turns out as more of the characters are fully revealed.
Anaxagoras the Foolish has enough knowledge to refute faith and to stir up a torrent capable of slaying gods.
Next is one of the few whose intended correlation is basically blatantly obvious. There's no question here, much like with Phainon later. This is Su. Su is the 7th ranked among the Flame Chasers, and his aliases include Lady of the Lake, Flame Chaser of Bodhi, Enlightened of Bodhi, and Enlightened One. His codename and signet is Bodhi, which is a reference to the Bodhi tree that the Buddha reached enlightenment while meditating under. As he is not playable in Honkai Impact 3rd, he doesn't have a secondary battlesuit title. His Honkai Beast was Mahama Yuri, and his Honkai Beast form is a peacock. He was entrusted with the second divine key, Cosmic Juggernaut, the train, and also wielded Abyss Flower after Elysia rejected it, calling it not cute enough for her. Su was a medical doctor and researcher with a strong belief that no one has the right to play as God or decide the fate of humanity but humanity itself. He's almost always depicted with his eyes closed, save for when he activates his powers or is getting serious. A bit that's played on somewhat by Elysia specifically, who often teases him about whether or not he's actually blind or has simply fallen asleep when they're speaking. Su is a psychic-type mantis like Aponia, and he's documented as having the ability to enter others' minds and even control their bodies if he has to. Though he never does this unless there's no other option, as depicted in his remembrances. He once did this with Kalpas, who had been knocked unconscious in order to turn the tide of battle against the 11th Hersher. His powers all revolve around the mind, capable of weaving powerful illusions and affecting people's inner worlds. He's capable of connecting minds over immense distances, as well as using people's minds to create dream worlds within their own consciousness. He's also one of very few people to have ever created a bubble universe themselves with the help of the second divine key. He named this bubble universe the Seed of Sumeru. After the apocalypse of his era, Su sealed himself in the second key, Cosmic Juggernaut, and spent 4,500 years observing other universes through the second key and his own innate mantis abilities in order to try to identify a way to defeat the Honkai, more or less by seeing if anyone else had ever managed to fully do so. Kevin and Su were childhood friends, while the other Flame Chasers met as adults or were complete strangers to each other until joining the fight for humanity. Su's remembrance is named Buddha's Memory, which some believe suggests that he may have been the source for this historical figure in the current era, as well as suggesting that he was a pious and fervent follower of Buddhism. His signets and many of the terms he uses to speak philosophically about his beliefs are Sanskrit Buddhist terms. Su is always depicted as deeply thoughtful and philosophical. Elysia mentions more than once that he may be difficult to understand for most people. This is reflected in Anaxagoras as well, down to his name. The name Anaxagoras comes from a real Greek philosopher and is one of our first huge clues as to what is going on in Amphoreus. Black Swan mentioned that Amphoreus is where three paths intertwine, suggesting a tug-of-war between eons, despite the fact that the world itself does not acknowledge eons, but rather their own gods, the Titans. Specifically, the real-world Anaxagoras put forth a physical theory of everything in everything, and claimed that nous, intellect or mind, was the motive cause of the cosmos. So, we now have both remembrance and erudition appearing here directly. With the Guiders of Calamity's Gate, it's safe to hypothesize that the third path appearing here may be either destruction or nihility, maybe even finality. Anaxagoras put forth what was perhaps an early version of Newtonian thought that energy cannot be created nor destroyed. It's written that he said, "What seems to us through perception to be generation of new entities or destruction of old ones is not that at all. Rather, objects that appear to us to be born, to grow, and to die are merely arrangements and rearrangements of more metaphysically basic ingredients." This is oddly enough, perhaps, able to tie back into the Buddhist belief of reincarnation, as well as the bit of text we got from this trailer's video description about the world of Amphoreus' rebirth. It also is rather on the nose about the idea of XPs and variants in the Hoyoverse itself. Xiaoji loves pulling in real-world psychology and philosophy, so this is no surprise. Anaxagoras' belief that the universe was controlled by the mind, or nous, is a theme that is strung throughout Su's own story in HI3 as well, and really feels as though it's an expanding of his character. He's my favorite Flame Chaser, so I'm of course extremely excited to see what they do with Anaxagoras. Su's belief that humanity should be in control of humanity's fate is also continued through this, as Anaxagoras believed in no gods, and the Anaxagoras in the story is said to be capable of stirring up a torrent that can slay gods. Just very cool layering all around in the writing here. Visually, he resembles Su in many ways, the long hair, though his leans more powder blue than gray. Su is also known for having tattoos, red V-shaped ones on his neck as well as multiple on his hands and fingers later on in the second key manga. Anaxagoras has a red mark on the back of his hand that seems to continue this trend for him. I also have to point out that he's doing the pose. That's just the Su pose, how he always appears sitting beneath his Bodhi tree. Only here, instead of a leaf floating down in his hand, it's this mote of light. Also, the eye patch as an extension of how he never opens his eyes in HI3 is a nice touch. One of his rings even has the same design as the tattoo on his finger in the second key manga. I would know. I spend a lot of time staring at those manga panels these days. If you haven't checked out our ongoing fandub of the manga, you should. I'll link it below. I'm trying to focus on this specifically for Anaxa because if given the chance, I could probably talk about Su for hours, so, I hope I managed to boil it down well enough with the focus of Anaxagoras specifically.
Go seek the priest who severs dawn from dusk, and let the sky become the slumbering cot from which she wakes.
This one baffled me at first before it became just as obvious as Anaxagoras and Su after thinking on it for a little while. Hyacine is most likely a reference to the hyacinth flower. Her tagline on the drip marketing they gave us on the official accounts is, "The priest heals the sky and rebuilds the mystical realm." This is Sakura, or her sister Rin, or perhaps meant to be a representation of both, who are key parts in the Flame Chaser story and why it ended the way it did. One obvious hint is that they're both flower names and, of course, the color palette. But long before Elysian Realm was a thing, Yae Sakura was introduced as her reincarnation in the current era, who knew Colin Castellana and died in the fight against the Hersher of Corruption's first incarnation in the current era. Colin managed to seal the Hersher in the black box, a relic from the previous era. In Sakura Samsara, this future Sakura is a priestess at Yae's shrine in Yae village. Her fate seems to always be the same, that her sister will be sacrificed and that it will drive her to her own end, so that's cheery. Hopefully things go better for Hyacine. Sakura is the 8th ranked Flame Chaser and her codename and signet is Setsuna, a Japanese word meaning an instant or single moment in time. Her Flame Chaser era battlesuit is Goshinso Memento, meaning the blossoms beseech the gods, which also alludes to her Miko role despite her not having been one in the Flame Chaser era. The identity of her Honkai beast, Yaksha, is one of a bit of debate as she appears to have bunny-like ears, but the transformed boss form of the 11th Hersher is a 5-tailed fox. Her sister Rin was the vessel for the 12th Hersher, and was killed for this despite showing no hostility towards humans. This set Sakura down a path of destruction, leading to her being the first Flame Chaser to die in the previous era. The current era Sakura was instead the one who became a pseudo-Hersher after her sister Rin was sacrificed by their village in an attempt to appease the gods, when Colin Castellana accidentally brought the 12th Hersher to their village that had been sealed in the box in the previous era. Aside from Aponia, who is considered an ascetic, Sakura is the only one who has any sort of connection to priests or holy duties, and with her matching hair and eyes, she's the only one that fits for Hyacine in my opinion. The illusion that Hyacine is perhaps sealed somewhere in a deep sleep further solidifies the connection to Sakura and Rin, as Rin was sealed away in the black box that Colin brought to Yae village, though her own mind had completely eroded into that of the Hershers by the time those events came to pass. I can't help but feel like even the imagery of the bird flying and being shot with an arrow is a reference to this whole thing.
Make him roar, Midamos the Undying. Pierce the enemy's king with Kremnos' blood.
At first glance, Midamos seemed easy to place, but I've waffled quite a bit in my placement of him ever since. While Kalpas is the first place my mind goes, the silhouetted Chrysos heir with a flame in hand is also just as much if not more of a match, as Kalpas never shows his face and is the Flame Chaser most associated with fire. After a lot of debate and sitting with this, I think he's just slightly more likely to be Kalpas than the other character who can at this point only be swapped between him and Cosma. While Midamos could still turn out to be more of a Cosma variant after all, I really think Midamos' Chinese name seals the deal. 1D means 10,000 calamities, while Kalpas' Chinese name is Qianjie, which means 1,000 calamities. I just think the naming convention is too unique to overlook. Midamos means terror, keeping in line with that theme. Then, onto Midamos' tagline. The heir apparent pursues strife and bathes in blood for the rightful crown. In multiple item descriptions, including the title of his remembrance vessel, Kalpas is referred to as the Mad King. Kalpas is the 6th ranked flame chaser and bears the codename and signet of decimation. He never removes his mask. He's a member of the same division as Sakura in Moth, and they were known to be rather close despite having several massive fights with collateral damage during their time as Mantis soldiers. Kalpas is arguably the most mysterious flame chaser, as he's implied for all intents and purposes to be literally an alien who fell to Earth. This opens up a number of possibilities for his identity. Either he's a sentient Honkai beast, but not a Hersher, potentially a lost, forgotten one of the Abyss goddess Saw's sky people, or something else entirely. Mobius goes to great lengths to get a look at his heart as depicted in one of his remembrances, and it's implied that he didn't receive a full metamorph surgery like the others as he didn't need it. Kalpas loves a good fight more than anything and wishes to never stop fighting. He longs for endless war. He's extremely emotionally unstable and may fly into a rage and start destroying things at any moment. At the same time, he's very capable of being quite caring, is a good cook, and is fond of children. There are rumors that he's fond of cute things and has several stuffed animals in his personal quarters, which is, I guess, what the kids these days call gat moe. Myos being called the Undying is rather apt as well, as Kalpas is described as being able to heal from almost any wound. When he was first taken in at Sundown Alley, he was described as near death but still managed to heal entirely on his own in a rather short amount of time. Myos has a similar color scheme to Kalpas, including the white hair with darker tips, as well as appearing in similar pose to Kalpas' appearance in his boss form. An easier to miss thing here is the appearance of several broken and disintegrating swords around Myos' feet, an iconic scene as described in Kalpas' remembrances. He was rather famous for destroying nearly every copy of the Key of Domination they had made, which were shaped like swords. Myos' introduction continues with "Pierce the enemy's king with Kremnos' blood." Kremnos literally means a steep cliff or the edge of a ravine, so it might just be an in-world term that we'll have to figure out later with regards to its in-universe meaning. Could be a family line referring to Myos' apparent royal blood.
Set her in motion, Cipher of the fleet-footed. Command the frozen time to once again flow.
Moving on to perhaps the most obvious variant of the bunch, Cipher the Fleet-Footed is a variant of Pardo, the 13th ranked Flame Chaser. Her design is more or less the same, even down to the style of her clothes, though Cipher's are more, well, covered up. Pardo's signet and codename is Reverie, and her main battlesuit title is Reverist Calico. The identity of her Honkai Beast fusion is unknown, but it's clearly cat-like, as it gave her cat ears and a tail, much like Sakura's did. Pardo describes herself as the weakest flame chaser. She's a scrappy street kid and acts as a merchant with a penchant for stealing people's things and selling them back to them in the Elysian realm. She became a mantis by accident after trying to return important-looking documents she found in ruins to Moth HQ in the hopes of getting a reward, and getting mistaken for one of the next batch of metamorph surgery candidates. Despite this, she wholeheartedly dedicated herself to the cause after coming out the other side. Despite her self-description, the Honkai Impact 3rd fans will always tell you that Pardo is the strongest flame chaser who, despite her very normal, very human fear, faced death with the courage of a true warrior. Both in the simulated Elysian realm and in the final fight against the final Hersher, Pardo burned herself up to make way for humanity's one and only chance. Even with her legs shaking, even though she cried and said, "I don't want to die," she still did what had to be done for the sake of humanity. Cipher's description makes it seem like she may once again be playing a similar role. Her skills as a thief, her speed and cunning being what makes her unique among the other heroes. She may appear weak or ordinary, or not to have as many flashy powers as the others, but she is not to be underestimated. While Pardo's lore is maybe lacking, her character is not. I hope that Cipher gets more fleshed out in this story just because the basis they built for her in HI3 is so damn good. As a final note, her remembrance vessel is titled The Mortal's Memory.
And that servant of the Hand Shadow, the daughter of River Styx. If you grant her the right to embrace, then even frozen death will sleep peacefully at her fingertips.
Castorice is described as the daughter of the river Styx, and her visual motif makes her flame chaser equivalent clear at a glance. Castorice's butterfly wings are a dead ringer for Amphoreus. Amphoreus is ranked 3rd among the flame chasers and considered the most feared mantis of them all. Her codename and signet is Discipline. The Honkai beast she is fused with, Mitra, has a form similar to that of a butterfly, and in her active Honkai reaction form, she gains several extra spectral limbs. This is likely a reference to Guanyin, the Buddhist goddess of mercy. Amphoreus' remembrance vessel is titled Ascetic's Memories. An ascetic is generally someone like a monk or a nun, or other hermit who seeks isolation in order to seek enlightenment. Amphoreus' battlesuit, Disciplinary Perdition, makes her resemble a nun. Her remembrance vessel bears the added caveat. A savior to some, a monster to others. She sees the strings of fate but can only be wound in them. There's no way to resist destiny, or so she thought. This is another reason as to why I think Aglaea is more likely to be analogous to Eden than Amphoreus. Though Amphoreus has the ability to see the future, she's trapped by her inability to change or affect anything that she foresees. In one of Vill-V's remembrances, she refers to the prison Amphoreus has created, the Deep End, like this. The Deep End. Everything is shrouded in endless darkness. Death and cold are eternal motifs here. Out of all of the flame chasers, plenty are associated with death in the way of, fighting and defeating their enemies. One might argue Kevin, too, can be associated with death in this way, but it's Amphoreus' backstory that really paints her as a guide for the dead as well as nigh-on omniscient mind controller. In Amphoreus' past, she looked after orphaned and sick children in a place called Sundown Alley. She used her innate psychic abilities. She had this gift even before she took the metamorph surgery and became a mantis, making her perhaps one of the most powerful human beings of their era just naturally, to place disciplines on these children. Think of Amphoreus' discipline like an extremely strong subliminal suggestion that, in most cases, cannot be fought against. She attempted to use this power to give the children in her care the strength and resilience to fight against the Honkai disease despite its 100% death rate. Unfortunately, this simply resulted in her lying to the children in her care over and over, telling them that they would survive, that they would heal and get better, often prolonging their suffering until the bitter end. In the end, all of the children under her care died, believing the sweet dream that they had a chance at getting better. I really don't think that anyone else in the main cast of Flame Chasers could possibly fit the image of the daughter of the river Styx any better. This is a core aspect of Amphoreus' character that is often forgotten about in lieu of everything that came after, when she'd already been taken into custody by Moth along with Kalpas. I get that Mobius has the more goth overall vibe here, but what is more River Styx adjacent than a person who literally ferried children to their deaths with sweet words and sweet embraces, trying to enact what she believed was right and merciful, with not so great results. Later on, it was Amphoreus' discipline that she placed on the surviving Moth soldiers and operatives that marked the beginning of the end for the Flame Chasers. She imparted the command, never give up in the battle against the Honkai, to these people, who then faced the 11th Herrscher, Sakura's little sister, Rin, who had awakened but shown no sign of aggression or danger to them whatsoever. It caused them to adhere to this command in an extreme way. The Moth soldiers stationed where Rin was detained took matters into their own hands and brutally killed her. This act of aggression is what caused the 11th Herrscher to fully manifest in Rin's last moments, painted by the hatred and fear caused by the senseless violence enacted on her. Despite Amphoreus' piety and insistence on following the path of a holy ascetic, Amphoreus seemed to be cursed. No matter the good intentions of the discipline she impressed on people in hopes of helping humanity, they almost always backfired in this way. The final piece to me is the fact that Elysian Realm's main server is created out of Amphoreus' physical body and mind. She is literally a living gravestone. The Elysian Realm supercomputer is described many times as the final resting place and grave of the Flame Chasers. After Castorice's introduction, we see a character surrounded by water, with the phrase, "You will hear the sound of the ocean's abyss," reverberating through the storm. This character has bothered the hell out of me for a minute because her design's really similar to Eden's overall, and Eden is associated with water through her Honkai beast, Varuna, and her Honkai form being a space whale and all. However, I'm about 99% sure that this is the first of several characters being introduced that are not direct members of the Chrysos heirs. There are several very important side characters attached to the Flame Chasers, and the story couldn't progress without them. Dr. May, Klein, other Mantis warriors like Dystopia and Atto, Griseo's father, Nua and Fushi, one of which Lingsha is a variant of, and several others. This character's design doesn't match up with any of the remaining silhouettes. While she does have a headpiece, it's closer to Kokomi's hair from Genshin Impact, not to mention she has straight fringe, almost a Hime cut, while the other remaining character with similar features in the silhouettes has an entirely different outfit and hairline. The spiky crown is also totally different from this character's, maybe, horns? So I think the next few characters are not Chrysos heirs and thus not directly related in a literal sense to the flame chasers they're riffing off of. The next one, after Water Lady, is an Outlander shown only in a silhouette, with the shadow of a train passing behind them. Personally, I think the silhouette here is probably Sunday. You can see the asymmetrical cut of his outfit and his little head wings. After this, we can also see a character in a ragged cloak walking through a wasteland that visually mimics the infamous CG used in HI3 to depict the end of the previous era's civilization, with the Flame Chasers' signature divine keys scattered throughout the irradiated desert. This one's another mystery though. It could very well be any of the characters we've already been introduced to, or maybe even one that's about to appear. But just before that, there's another important HI3 reference I don't think I've seen anybody talk about here yet. Here we see a chessboard with two sides, only it seems only meant to invoke the idea of a chessboard, as it's clearly not a typical classic chessboard. There's only one color, white. On the bottom side, in the same red and black, used to depict the abyss and the so-called heretical tide, we see a woman's hand place a single piece down on the underside of the crumbling board. The Hoyoverse devs love their chest and Go/Xiangqi references. Obviously, we have the chess piece Gnosis in Genshin, and in HSR, it's often said that the universe is a chessboard the Eons are playing a game across. In Honkai Impact 3rd, we have a rather enigmatic figure whose true identity we still don't know for sure, though there's at least one pretty good guess that can be made. At the very end of the second key manga, the flame chaser Su, who Anaxagoras is based on, dies. After his physical death, he sinks into the Sea of Quanta with the remains of the mini-bubble universe he was in and meets a god, as well as obviously confirming the existence of an afterlife. The chessboard is the same style as the one we see the disembodied woman's hand place a chess piece on, only white rather than black, or better described as just transparent galaxy print, I guess. This faceless deity challenges Su to a game, though we have yet to see the stakes or the outcome just yet. We do know that Su's spiritual form is still very much alive and well down there, as we see him in the very last chapters of Part 1 of Honkai Impact 3rd, where he projected Fuhua's consciousness to that distant planet to save Griseo from Sa, the goddess of the abyss, who just might be his alternate universe female counterpart who's an evil mastermind. Yeah, that was a thing. Look, it's complicated. Anyway, I thought it was important to at least point out the visual similarities and the fact that the mysterious god who we encountered may have been Sa all along, as she was in fact at the bottom of the Sea of Quanta gathering power for eons. Side note, the piece being played appears to be a king piece, though I'm not great at telling the difference, especially when chess pieces can be highly stylized. That would make sense at least for the next part of the trailer. Another just random aside I have to point out here is how much this scene looks like the door to Conria in Genshin Impact. That is very spooky. No idea if it bears any meaning or if it's just an unintended, inevitable Greco-Roman architecture thing. This leads us to the Nameless King, ascending to the throne alongside countless heroes.
The nameless new king ascends the throne alongside countless heroes to embark on the grand mission of deliverance.
Like Castorice, Phainon has multiple pronunciations, and we don't know what the canon one is yet. Phainon and Phainon are both technically correct, so I'm just going to go with this for now. This is another one of the most obvious variants, with just one more to go after him. Phainon is a direct variant of Kevin Koslana, one of the most important characters in the whole of Honkai Impact 3rd's story. He's ranked number 1 amongst the Flame Chasers, their leader and symbolic figurehead, known as the world's strongest human. Kevin was the very first person to survive the Mantis Metamorph surgery. His remembrance vessel is called Hero's Memory. His aliases include the Prince, Deliverance, Merlin, Sire, and the Serpent, as leader of the World Serpent Organization in Mobius's absence. I could and might make an entire video just detailing his entire history and explaining his relevance, but I have to try to cook things down into a nice glaze here, so bear with me. We see Phainon in two of Kevin's iconic poses, first glancing over his shoulder with that icy gaze of his, then holding his sword aloft. The narration specifically mentions Deliverance, which is his code name and his signet. One thing I love about Kevin's theming in Honkai Impact 3rd is that he's a bundle of contradictions. He's simultaneously the world's greatest hero and the final boss that must be overcome by Kiana and her friends. His metamorph surgery fused him with a Honkai beast called Parvati, causing his body temperature to lower to sub-zero temperatures so extreme that he could never physically touch another non-mantis human without freezing their skin solid or causing at the very least extreme frostbite. However, his divine key was made from the core of the Hersher of Fire, a moth member that he had to take out with his own hands when she was taken over by the will of the Hersher, and the previous Eris Himiko. Wielding this divine key, the Judgment of Shamash, he represents the duality of ice and fire. Phainon is depicted lifting his sword, directly challenging the crumbling effigy of the Titans, the old gods we were shown in the start of the video. His HI3 version started off as a normal boy who loved to play basketball and had a best friend in Su and had a crush on a girl that he liked, Mei, but after losing nearly all of his comrades and spending 50,000 years watching the same cycle repeat, he became cold, tired, and jaded. In the end, eliminating Honkai was his only drive. He no longer cared about humanity. In fact, even humanity itself was an acceptable sacrifice if the enemy could be eradicated. This led him to enacting Project Stigma, which was in purpose the same as Sunday's plan to keep everyone in Enna's dream forever. Humanity would eventually wither and die within their dream worlds with a select few whose stigmata genes activated who would be able to carry on. However, since almost all people who were able to naturally activate these stigmata were genetically women, the future of even the few survivors was not guaranteed. We already know the fate of one other Kevin in this universe. When Acheron and Welt exchanged stories on Penacony, she told him that she faced Kevin alone and ended him with her own hands. In the Honkai Impact 3rd universe, Mei Raiden had her friends and the will of humanity behind her when she, as the Hersher of Origin, Kiana Kaslana, as the Hersher of Finality, and Bronya Zacic as the Hersher of Truth, faced off with him and won. This discrepancy seems to have completely changed the fates of their respective worlds. In Acheron's world, there was not a happy ending. One might even say the ending of Part 1 of HI3 is rather bittersweet as well, as Kiana was confined to the moon in order to seal away the Honkai with her newfound authority over the cocoon of finality. Even in the world of Amphoreus, it seems Kevin is still on this path to deliverance. Only time will tell whether this time he will fly or fall. After this, we again see the sun as an eye like the Hersher of Corruption, with some cryptic statements about the sun etching the footprints of humanity. Phainon seems to be associated with the sun, as we can see several sun-shaped emblems on his outfit from the start, but what exactly that means for the story is something we will have to wait to find out. We can only extrapolate these little connections and guess for now. Here's my somewhat rapid-fire round of the remaining flame chasers depicted in silhouettes. According to what I've pieced together so far, we're missing Mobius, Hua, Cosma, and Griseo. And even though we have only shapes to go on and some of the other variants are very, very different from their original designs, I actually feel like these four are pretty obvious. Mobius is first. The design has a similar spiked headpiece to her base battlesuit, Infinite Ouroboros. Mobius tends to play a special binding role in any narrative regarding the Flame Chasers. She's a founding member of the Moth organization and is the scientist who first conceived the metamorph surgery. She doesn't care about ethics or rules, only about the advancement of science and techniques, going so far as to say that she believes in order to advance, humanity may have to cease being human at all. Mobius and Dr. May, Kevin's high school sweetheart, and a more or less normal human, were the ones who came up with the idea of Project Stigma and other various plans to preserve humanity in the previous era. The silhouette here, aside from having the similar headpiece, is posed in a way that's similar to her lilting, serpent-like movements. Mobius is ranked the 10th Flame Chaser and is codenamed and signet of Infinity. Elysia, who was the founder of the Flame Chasers and who assigned their ranks, stated that she gave her this ranking specifically to keep her from holding too much power in the group, if that gives you any idea of what type of person she is. Mobius has a bit of a classic yandere trope personality, full of moments of deranged laughter, and can sneer a backhanded insult like nobody's business. She was born a genius with the ability to speak almost at birth, and has never let anyone forget this fact. She's one of the characters that really personifies the themes brought up in the Elysian Realm storyline. The question of what makes someone a hero. Can someone be remembered as a hero even if they also did morally dubious things in order to pursue the ultimate goal of saving and protecting something? Mobius's Honkai form is a massive black snake, and she has the ability to basically become incorporeal and stalk through the shadows unseen. She personally hunted the Honkai beast she chose for her own metamorph surgery, which she performed on herself in her pursuit of immortality. She can be killed over and over, and she just molts her skin and reforms. Though the downside to this is that each time this happens, she loses a few years, slowly regressing into a childlike form. Any time spent avoiding certain death scenarios, she regains her age at a normal rate. This of course resulted in some points in time where she appeared almost comically younger than her age, much to her own irritation. Looking at the silhouette from this trailer, it seems like this character is looking haughtily back over her shoulder and seems to have an almost ribcage-like design in her outfit, which is honestly not that different from the general motif of Mobius's fit and her snake form. I also find it funny that this silhouette moves center screen at the tail end of The Flame Chase is a journey of constant loss, among which even life itself holds little value. Yeah, that's Mobius core. The next silhouette is one that evokes another flame chaser, but to the left, kind of like Hyacine and Sakura. This shape is just so familiar to me, and I think it makes perfect sense as an overall choice for one reason. One of our missing flame chasers is Hua. She appears throughout the history of Honkai Impact 3rd as one of the longest lived, while actually active in the real world. Whereas Kevin and Su were both isolated from humanity, and Griseo, the other survivor, was trapped on a distant planet with the Ark somewhere. And she has taken many forms and many different identities. We already have one in-game, if only teased so far, back on the Luo Fu. Martial Hua is just obviously going to be a Hua variant. Obviously. Now, taking the color, hair, and pose as a hint, I think that our Amphoreus variant of Hua may just be Hersher of Sentience flavored instead, so as to avoid two variants who are too much alike. For example, look at Silverwolf and Bronya, who are both based on Bronya from HI3, but one is based on her Captain-verse form, Brony, while the other is based on her Silverwing NEX battlesuit, depicting her after the events of the main story of HI3. The Hersher of Sentience, affectionately called Senti for short, is a life form that gained, well, sentience in Hua's unoccupied body after Auto-Apocalypse shot and killed her, but kept and repaired her physical body. Senti looks similar to Fu Hua, but is an entirely different being with entirely different mannerisms and overall character. That said, Hua herself is the 12th ranked flame chaser, bearing the codename and signet of Vicissitude. Her remembrance is called Soldier's Remembrance, as she sees herself as nothing but an average rank-and-file soldier. Her Honkai beast is Garuda, taking the form of a fiery phoenix. Senti is brash and wild, like a teenager who's been given way more power than they have any business trying to control. She knows she's able to crush any human like a bug and is arrogant and can, most of the time, back it up with actual ability. She has also become one of the most beloved characters in the entirety of HI3 canon, so I think it'd be foolish not to capitalize on that fact if nothing else. The silhouette even appears to have a similar earring. Right here, that doesn't appear to be part of her hair. The silhouette also has a similar collar as the Onyx Simurgh Fu Hua skin, which is how Senti very first appeared, before she fully separated her own form from Hua's. Also, the colors are Senti's signature colors. Next up is this spiky guy. Now, this one I keep waffling with my demos. Cosma and Kalpas don't have a lot of visual similarities, really, and the naming conventions and such really made me think Midamos is more likely to be Kalpas than this guy. However, it's important to mention, Kalpas wears a mask at all times, and only two people, Kevin and Mobius, have ever seen him without it and lived to tell the tale. This guy does have a similar mask and is depicted holding a flame, which is Kalpas' whole shtick. So in the end, I think it'll take actual storyline stuff and some characterization to be 100% sure which is which between the two. But hey, narrowing it down this far is pretty good in my opinion. Honestly, looking back at Midamos, his facial structure is even similar to Cosmo's, along with having the chest tattoo thing going on. Honestly, the biggest tell will be how Myos interacts with Phainon, as Cosma is kind of a Kevin fanboy, while Kalpas is more indifferent to him, might even dislike him, though that's hard to be clear when Kalpas is involved. He acts like he doesn't like anybody. Since I talked about Kalpas for Myos, Cosma gets this slot until further notice, in part because Cosma does in fact have almost bug-like carapace on his hands and feet, very similar to the ones you can see in this silhouette's image, as well as horns. He does have a visual effect around his Honkai reaction form, which is a big werewolfish dog thing that happen to be flames, but they're dark blue. Cosma is the 9th Flame Chaser, bearing the codename and signet of Daybreak. He's said to have inherited his signet from Atto, another Mantis warrior, and the Flame Chaser Griseo's father, who was a mentor to him. He's reserved and quiet and a habitual overthinker, sometimes played for laughs. Sometimes he'll overthink an entire conversation before ending up blurting out the worst possible choice of responses, which is considered by Elysia to be rather endearing. Beyond that, Cosma is perhaps one of the least fleshed out of the Flame Chasers, so I hope we really get to dig deep into this version of him. Part of me almost hopes that Myos is the one meant to be his variant, just so we can get to know him better right at the start, but everything from the order in which the Flame Chasers themselves were introduced to the stuff I mentioned in the previous section tip it just slightly in the direction of it being the other way around. We'll see. This guy is honestly the only one that I don't feel relatively sure about. The final silhouette is another one that's pretty easy. Her silhouette is pretty unmistakable. The final Flame Chaser, confirmed to be alive in Honkai Impact 3's current story, is Griseo. She bears the codename and signet of Stars. She's ranked 11th, a ranking Elysia gave her in the hopes that it would keep her from getting pulled into the others' politics and squabbling. She has 2 battlesuits with the titles Starry Expression and Cosmic Expression. Griseo is a remarkable character and one of my personal favorites. She was very young when she received the metamorph surgery and would not have been a candidate for it normally. It was performed on her as a last-ditch effort to save her life. Miraculously, she pulled through and became the youngest Flame Chaser. After losing her parents in the Honkai War, she was cared for directly by Epona, who she even called Mama. Even before she became a Mantis, she was a gifted prodigy-level painter at a young age, and after her transformation, she gained the ability to see the unique colors of many things like auras that she could then trace and identify. She's capable of analysis of things on a level that even the scientists in the group would struggle to achieve, though she might not necessarily understand what she's seeing. Griseo's remembrance vessel is called the Painter's Memory and consists of images she created rather than text files. The silhouette here is a pretty clear profile of her adult form, which was revealed for the first time in the last chapters of Part 1 of Agi 3, after Fu Hua rescued her from the long slumber the Abyss Goddess Sa had trapped her in. Like, it's just literally the same hair and stance, not to mention literally being in the teal-blue color that's her main motif. Therefore, we cast even ourselves into the flame, only to inscribe the opening stroke in the poem of creation. I love this line. It truly feels like an ode to the Flame Chasers, to the 13 who claim they never became heroes despite living and dying for the sake of humanity. We can see everyone depicted here in a heavenly fresco style, though it'll take some work to pick out who's who. But that leaves us with 12, not 13. The 13th is the looming presence that has been threaded through all of these descriptions, the name that keeps coming up again and again, Elysia. A girl named Serene appears at the very end, and is one of the few whose voices we hear. She does in fact share the same voice actors in both Chinese and Japanese with Elysia. Elysia's words are often punctuated with that little music note that appears in the closed captioning. Here is where I need to talk about Elysia, but somehow that's harder than I expected it to be. How can you boil down the singular most important existence in the Honkai Impact 3rd world to something digestible? Without Elysia's existence, the events of Honkai Impact 3rd could not have happened. The fandom jokingly calls her Pink Jesus, but that's not far from the truth. It's by her willing sacrifice that Kiana could defeat the will of the Hersher and become a human with Hersher powers. If Elysia hadn't made this possible by sacrificing herself before the final battle of the previous era, all of the humans who became Hershers in the current era would have been the same mindless killing machines that the ones before them had been. Elysia is an angelic, pure figure who loves the world more than herself, more than anything. Maybe it's cheesy, but in the end, it was always love that mattered. Love that won the most important battles. Her sacrifice was Himiko's, it was Fu Hua's, it was Kiana's. There's a reason so many people were moved so intensely just by hearing her voice. Elysia was the glue that held the Flame Chasers together. She was the soul and the life, always driving them towards the goal of protecting humanity and the future. We haven't met Serene properly yet, but we will soon enough. And I hope that she touches hearts just as deeply as her Honkai Impact 3rd counterpart did. Elysia is the second-ranked Flame Chaser, only next to Kevin, who she held in higher regard than herself. She bears the code name and signet of Human Ego, and her active Honkai reaction form is a Manta Ray. But all of this aside, Elysia has a great secret. Elysia is the very first Hersher, one that was never counted, as she had nothing in her heart but boundless love for humanity. There was no Honkai eruption or disaster found in her wake, only the deep impression that she left on those that she met, almost as though they had brushed against divinity. In her Hersher form, her Honkai beast appears alongside her rather than as a transformation. She's close friends with Kevin and Eden especially, but manages to have a good relationship with nearly everyone, even the dour Mobius, who calls her a traitor for being a Hersher, and Kalpas, who finds just about everyone and everything annoying to some extent. I can't wait to see what role Serene is going to play in the story, though we know it will surely parallel Elysia's in some way, which could be setting us up for a whole lot of heartbreak. But hey, Hoyoverse thrives on our tears, so what can we do? They say that Elysia's existence was a slim, infinitesimal 1 in a billion chance of happening. I wonder if the reason Acheron's world was doomed from the start had anything to do with it not having an Elysia. Maybe we'll find out a little bit about that going forward. Alright, this video has gotten long enough. All I really wanted to do was reach out across this gap in imaginary space between two Honkai universes, and even just a little bit prepare us for what is to come. I know a lot of people criticize the idea of reusing stories and characters that Hoyoverse does, but I've been following them for years, and I find that honestly it makes me think of how fans in general interact with the media they love. I mean, people read fanfiction and love it, right? Even if they're just reading about their favorite characters meeting in another life in a coffee shop or going to some other universe or just another reality where everything horrible that happened to the characters they love didn't happen or happened differently. I think it's really cool that the writers can engage with the fans in almost the same way. Look, there's a saying that goes, there's nothing new under the sun, and especially in this day and age, that's more true than ever. The demand for originality isn't even one that can truly be acquiesced to. I guarantee you, if you've thought of it, someone else has too, even if you've never personally interacted with the concept before. If anything, I think revisiting stories and themes gives them a chance to blossom and grow. It gives us new perspectives, shows us new and different angles on the things that we already loved, and for a lot of you it will be a brand new story and brand new characters to love anyway. I just hope you can try to put any negative Nancy thoughts down about recycled, rehashing, reusing, whatever, out of your mind, and try to give this story a chance, even if you don't have any interest in backtracking to Honkai Impact 3rd along with it. Xiaoji never misses in my opinion, and I'm certain we're in for a story for the ages. Anyway, thanks for watching, and especially thanks if you stuck with me all the way to the end. I hope that this Flame Chaser primer helps you prepare for the themes and ideas that are coming as we make our way to our next stop on the trailblazing journey. As always, this is Ganymede, signing off. I hope you'll join me on my next journey.